In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, now and ever, until the ages of ages. Amen. At the last session, we approached the state of drunkenness from the standpoint of alcohol. And during the times of Tobias, alcohol was the most prevalent, if not the only source of drunkenness. Today, however, alcohol is not the only source of intoxication, and a number of substances are used to attain the so-called high, and these substances are commonly called drugs, and these drugs are known to offer a different form of intoxication. In other words, each drug is responsible for a different type of high, not like alcohol. Today we will concentrate on the effects of tobacco or cigarette smoking, which may not cause the same degree of drunkenness as the other drugs, but nonetheless it is considered a drug and a drug of social acceptance. But let's make no mistake about it, cigarette smoking is classified in the area of narcotics. It brings on the same bodily response as the other drugs, in a lesser form, of course. But nonetheless, it is a drug which has become publicly and socially accepted. Cigarette smoking promotes poisoning, much like alcohol and all the other drugs, which cause irreparable harm to various bodily organs. Toxification is a term we offer here, and people that abuse these substances and alcohol need to attend several detoxification programs. Again, cigarette smoking slowly poisons the body. The first-time smoker feels a dizziness, usually gets a strong headache, which can induce vomiting, and the face can become pale, very dizzy, breaking out in a cold sweat. Again, these are the side effects of the initial introduction of nicotine into one's bloodstream. Again, not all people react in this manner after their first cigarette, but a number of first-time smokers describe these reactions. After continuous use, these side effects disappear, and the symptoms of smoking vary from light laryngitis to cancer and heart attack. It is clinically proven and very well known that a percentage of all cancers today are caused by smoking. We all know this. The Surgeon General has been issuing warnings for years. Heart disease and cancer are the cause of death of many smokers. Doctors order heart patients not to smoke. As we see the initial body defense mechanisms subside, such as dizziness, vomiting, cold sweat, but long-term effects of tobacco are usually catastrophic, which shows this long-term poisoning of the body. And a hospital in Rhode Island does very well in defending the health of their patients. There's a sign at their gift shop or the hospital store that says, "We do not sell cigarettes because we love you very much." This is very true. If you love someone, you do not offer him or her a cigarette, and you certainly do not encourage a non-smoker to start this catastrophic habit. Today there's a great campaign against smoking. People today can lose their jobs if they smoke in smoke-free environments. And we have smoke-free restaurants, smoke-free air flights, smoke-free shopping malls, and this is a great start. Large firms have been panic-stricken after several cancer patients have turned around to file a lawsuit against large tobacco companies. However, after all these warnings, after all these attempts to enhance public awareness, it seems that very little is being accomplished. These warnings are not enough, and people still use drugs and hypothermic needles despite the AIDS threat. We are not saying that these warnings are not helpful. They are simply not enough. You see, it is not enough for me to tell you, be careful, do not drink and drive, be careful because of this or that disease. If I tell you all this and I don't explain why, I need to also explain that behind this disease there is the fear of God, the commandment of God. And if I don't instill the fear of God in your heart, you will not be careful. And I must say over and over again, and I will never stop saying this, it is a matter of faith. You must believe what the Word of God says. Christ said about this, "I told you, I spoke to you about earthly things, and you do not believe. How can I tell you about heavenly things?" So behind and beyond our cries of warning, such as don't drink and drive and say no to drugs and smoking causes cancer, behind all these warnings, we must have faith in God, faith and fear of God, faith especially in the commandments of God, and a strong spirituality is needed to solidify my protection from all these harmful vices. In speaking about tobacco and smoking, we are not going to involve ourselves with statistics. These are readily available in encyclopedias, libraries, and the daily papers. We would like to look at this matter from a spiritual perspective, a theological perspective, if you will. Our attempt is always to acquire this fear of God, which will ensure that we become careful. Tobacco, as we know, is a perennial plant. Its biological name is Nicotiana, and there are 40 different species of this plant. This plant is indigenous of Australia, Africa, and America. When Columbus discovered America in 1492, his sailors were amazed when they saw Indians in Cuba drawing smoke through their nostrils with a Y-shaped pipe called tobacco. Shortly after that, a supply of this newly discovered item was brought to Spain and Portugal, and from Lisbon, Portugal, the French ambassador introduced it to France. His name was Nicot, Nicot, Nicot. From that time on, the plant was cultivated in Europe, but it was used mainly for medicinal purposes. It was thought that, at the time, it was thought that this plant had some medicinal value. Later on, it was used by the common public, and when it slipped out of the hands of medicine and entered the hands of the merchants, it circulated the entire earth. There's not a single country today that does not sell cigarettes to its citizens. Tobacco was the name of the Central American island, and Nicot was the French ambassador who transferred this product to France. So as we mentioned, the scientific name of this product is Nicotiana tobacco. But what is the great selling secret behind this product, which took over the entire world by storm? It would be interesting for someone to study the spread of smoking from country to country. There was a law years ago enacted in Persia seeking the death penalty for anyone that would sell or use tobacco. They took extreme measures tougher than the ones we have for drug trafficking today. But what is the cause behind this wide expansion of cigarette smoking? What makes smoking so popular? Probably the same thing that makes drugs so widespread. Outside of the mimicking factor, people will try smoking to keep up with their friends, to be social. So outside of this mimicking factor that exists, the widespread use of tobacco is due to the physiological effect that it has on the human organism, since it causes a temporary lift, a temporary good feeling. The nervous system becomes suppressed. Tension may be relieved, and when someone becomes upset or in a state of nervousness, he will light up a cigarette immediately. He will light up when he's worried or anxious. And this is used to bring about a suppression, a drugging, so to speak, because we spoke earlier about tobacco being a socially acceptable drug. So this drugging is very enjoyable to the organism, and smokers insist that they smoke because they enjoy it. Several years ago, when I was visiting Athens, I saw a huge billboard of an imported cigarette, and generally speaking, cigarette billboards are always very large. At any rate, the slogan underneath this cigarette pack, was, "If you smoke once, you will smoke again." Or, "He who smokes, he will smoke again." What does this mean? I guess they mean to advertise that this cigarette is so great, so tasty, that the smoker will prefer this brand over all the other brands. Incidentally, there have been various rumors about this brand of cigarettes being laced with traces of other narcotics, and if that holds true, then certainly once you smoke, you will probably smoke again. This may sound far-fetched, but in today's day and age, this is not impossible. It is common knowledge, and this I heard from quite a few different individuals, that at some point the secret recipe of Coca-Cola, at least in the very early stages of its distribution, called for some traces of cocaine. Coca is the name of the plant from which cocaine is extracted. How is this possible? Well, it's very difficult now because of FDA regulations forcing the manufacturers of these products to specify the ingredients and make them known to the public, but this was not the case in the 50s or 60s, if I'm not mistaken. The Coke jingle in Greece had nothing to do with the real thing, but once you drink, you will drink again. And now this cigarette is using a similar phrase: if you smoke once, you will smoke again. Needless to say, we must be very careful in these situations where massive corporations are involved, and we have to be naive to assume that they will stop short of using even illicit means to enhance the only thing that matters to them, the bottom line and the interests of their stockholders. However, the fact is that cigarette smoking offers satisfaction to the smoker, it offers enjoyment, and this enjoyment gives a lift to the nervous system, and this temporary lift, together with the taste of the fragrant smoke, makes it habit-forming or addicting and quite difficult for someone to kick the habit of smoking or a certain drug or alcohol, and this eventually becomes a strong passion. The memory of this temporary lift, along with the physical addiction, becomes inedible to the human organism. This memory cannot be erased. There are people who will quit smoking for many years, 10, 15, 20 years, and at some point the smell of the cigarette from another smoker wakes up something in them, and they cannot resist. They take up smoking all over again. This is a common occurrence, especially in the area of drugs, cocaine, crack, for instance, but alcohol as well. All these substances leave an inedible memory on the nervous system. Father Athanasios here takes a very extreme position. He says that if you hear that a person used to do drugs or had a serious problem with alcohol, and now he's sober, and he happens to be a nice person, and he's interested in your daughter or your son to be married, Father Athanasios says, I don't know what you would do, but I would try to discourage this type of union. Father Athanasios says if he had a daughter, he would not give his blessing for such a wedding. Needless to say, we no longer have this type of control over our children, especially in this country. So God help us. The fact is that we have no guarantee that this person would refrain from using drugs in the future. This memory can be stirred up at any time, especially during a time of a difficult circumstance, a time of trial, during the loss of a job, the loss of a family member, or an argument. This memory is stored in the brain, and much like in the computer, the right buttons need to be present, and this memory will be activated. Again, let's never forget that this is characteristic of all drugs, not just smoking. Drugs, smoking, and alcohol. We must also understand that not everything that God created is edible or consumable. Nowadays, we feel that we should try and inhale everything under the sun, and this is a harmful curiosity. Many of these substances were created by God for medicinal purposes only, to cure some ailments, and that's all. It seems as though, my friends, God has planted this tree of the knowledge of good and evil on earth, and this tree continues to be planted among us, and God continues to tell us from this tree you will not eat. Do not try this fruit. And the wretched man tries it, and he digs his own grave with his own hands. This is terrible. Let's be careful not to try this fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. What pushed Adam and Eve to sin? Two things: the devil and curiosity. We must not be curious about these things. As we said earlier, this is a matter of faith, and only harm will come out of this senseless curiosity. What more proof do we need? There are so many victims around us. We don't need to be the next victim in order to believe. The writing is on the wall. By trying a cigarette one time, you increase your probability of being a long-term smoker by 70%. Your chances of never becoming a smoker remain 100% when you resolve not to touch a cigarette. Let's remember this great truth from Aesop's fables. The king of the animals was getting old and less ambitious, and thought to himself, how am I going to ensure my daily meals? So he thought of this great plan to ensure his daily meals in a much easier and effortless way. He announced that he wanted to make peace with all the animals, and they were to feel free to come in and visit His Highness on a daily basis and pay their respects. Many animals got very excited about this, and they decided to go ahead with the request of the king. When this traffic slowed down a bit, the lion came to his door, and he saw a fox standing outside of the cave, keeping a comfortable distance. And the king asked, "My dear fox, why don't you come in to pay your respects to your king like everyone else?" And the wise fox replied, "Your Highness, I am waiting to hear and talk to the animals that came in. I need to listen to their input. In other words, I see many coming in, but none coming out. You are eating them. Am I that stupid to become your next meal?" Why couldn't we be like the fox? Why couldn't we learn from the misery of our friends, neighbors, associates, high school buddies? Death of drunk drivers, drug overdoses, AIDS, cancers of the lungs, emphysema, and so on. Not a day goes by where our daily newspapers neglect to inform us of these enriching articles and news stories. Saint Nicodemus of the Holy Mountain, the Hagorite, the patron saint of our society, makes reference to smoking and takes a very harsh stance against it. In his book, Spiritual Manual, or Πνευματικών Εγχειρίδιων, and Spiritual Exercises, Πνευματικά Γυμνάσματα, he uses very strong language towards Christians who persist in this habit. Outside of the biological harm, smoking is also an indicator of ethical misconduct. If a young man or a young woman, a Sunday school student of our church, for instance, is beginning to smoke, it shows that this person is spending time with the wrong crowd, and our young person is trying to copy or mimic the behavior of his or her companions. At this point, we can no longer talk about a spiritual life. It is not possible. Or at least it was impossible a few years ago. Today, it is not impossible for our young Orthodox to drive to the beach with their girlfriend with a cigarette on the one hand and a composchini on the other, guzzle down a few six-packs on a Saturday night, and come back Sunday morning to teach Sunday school. If I am wrong, pray that God forgives me, but this behavior is not unheard of here in our country. Now, how can we mix spirituality with this sort of lifestyle? I have no idea. I cannot understand it. No, under these circumstances, we cannot be talking about a spiritual life, let alone teaching it. St. Maximus the Confessor writes, "He who keeps his body healthy, free from illicit pleasures, he will have it act as a servant to achieve great things." In other words, the body will be subservient to the spirit and not vice versa. My friend, you are destroying your body and eventually your soul with drugs, smoking, alcohol. Why do you want to throw all this away and self-destruct? Again, we repeat, let's not succumb to the curiosity of trying the first cigarette. 70% of the people that want to experiment and try the first puff of smoke, 70% will join the ranks of habitual smokers. For those of you that never tried smoking, boast in the Lord. Thank God. Say, by the grace of God, I never touched a cigarette in my entire life. We need to increase in the fear of God, and in the absence of this very appropriate attitude, the hand of God will fall very heavy and strike our health at some point. The Spirit of God is very clear in the 38th chapter of the Wisdom of Sirach. He who sins against his Maker will fall in the hands of the doctor. What an appropriate verse for schools, hospitals, and the like. How true. Death is lurking behind all these substances. Nicotine, alcohol, and especially drugs, our next topic. Death is hidden behind attractive boxes and luxurious cartons. The Spirit of God says in the Wisdom of Solomon, do not invite an untimely death from your life of deception. Do not drag destruction unto yourselves from the works of your own hands. We would like to extend to you a petition of love, Father Athanasios says, a petition of love from God and from us. My young friends, never ever try a cigarette. And if someone has done this already, let him pray with fervor to God to deliver him from this passion. Smoking is a strong and destructive passion.
και στην εις ουρανούς.